All right. So when having a debate, I feel you're the real loser if you come into the debate with a closed mind and you're unwilling to get a new perspective. The one thing I said in this debate is the United States government is built to collapse. And when that happens, why does it matter if it happens through illegal immigration, if it comes through hyperinflation of the currency, if it happens through whatever other way that they're designing this collapse to happen. And when you watch the interview, you'll see that how we discuss this. But at this point, I definitely don't feel that way. I think that if they're on purposely designing it to collapse through illegal immigration, we should definitely look at this and point this out, that there's people that are bombing people across the other side of the world, that there's people that are taking people and paying for them to get shipped to certain areas, and certain areas that have different ideologies, and the people that are there and forcing immigration, which is forced immigration is much different than open immigration. But yeah, looking after this conversation back into it, that's definitely a new perspective that I gained at this, that yes, it definitely does matter how we create what happens after it collapses, and how we get ourselves ready for what's happening, and to allow somebody else to control and to do something that's going to cause such a drastic impact among everybody in the world is something that we should not allow. So here's the video. Open borders versus closed borders, anarchist versus minarchist.
The trivium, but critical thinking and also Socratic dialogue. And what we're going to be doing in this session, or not in this session, but in this this debate, so to speak, is what's called a Socratic debate. And the Socratic debate is a little bit different than a typical debate. It's considered more of a strong sense critical thinking rather than weak sense critical thinking, as in it's not me pitting my view up against somebody else's view. It's us asking each other questions from a place of assumed ignorance. I don't understand his viewpoint, and he's going to inform me on his viewpoint, and then I'm going to ask questions to get more information, and I have objective standards that I use in this. So it's not about, I'm right, you're wrong, you're right, I'm wrong. It's the objective standards that we ask with the questions that actually determines validity of an argument, and not us, so to speak. So it's really about coming to the truth of a matter, and creating nuance. So where you might have some really broad view on something, that's kind of a black and white view, we're going to start being able to learn shades of gray to our view and become more nuanced and educated on it. So I could pick up some things from you. You could pick up some things from me. That doesn't mean that your overall view is going to change or my overall view is going to change, but we might pick up some things from each other's view that actually helps inform and shape our own views.
Okay, so I'm not super familiar with the Socratic dialogue, so I do have a question. There's some of the points that I wanted to talk about come from knowledge that I already do know from a video that you put out. So you're saying like me just putting out my opinion with nothing of assumed what you assumed.
I would assume ignorance and ask you questions about your viewpoint.
All right, and there's things about your viewpoint that I already know from seeing that video. So would that be wrong in this dialogue to point those things out and to talk about those things from your video? And if you watch some
questions about my viewpoint, I would re-express it, and then you would start asking questions that would challenge my viewpoint. So, but it's how do you say this? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to share your viewpoint. And you can even, and then based on what you answer, so like at the most, we'll be speaking for 2 minutes. After your 2 minutes or up to 2 minutes, because it doesn't really have to be that long, I'll ask you a question based on what I just heard. And then you'll do some more stuff. And then based on your answers, I'll ask you another question. Maybe I'll point out a contradiction, or I'll ask about a contradiction, and then you have an opportunity to resolve the contradiction or to provide clarity. And then sometimes I might repeat what you say, but in a different way, so that you can either tell me if I'm right or wrong in what I'm saying.
Okay, so to start off, let's clarify what the debate is actually about.
Yes.
So I have the stance that national borders are wrong because they're a violation of a human right to freely travel.
Okay.
So, and I'm taking it by the limited closed borders. You are talking about national borders. Is
Yes.
this okay?
I'm talking about national borders with, but more in the sense of, so you have the public grounds within a homeowners association, you have the private grounds in a homeowner. So you have your, but the gated community is, public lands that everyone in the community owns.
Right.
So in that sense, I'm just saying it scales. So it's, it scales from individual boundaries to collective boundaries. And the collectives can get a little bigger, like states and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, I can agree that the collectives can get bigger, but then there's a point where it interferes with somebody's right, and that's when the public highways are not accessible to everybody. So if you look in San Diego, what's going on right there is a violation of human rights. There's people that on Highway 5 cannot travel all the way through Highway 5, a commons that's established, a huge highway, a commons that's established. They're not able to travel through there without being stopped and checked and frisked and given paperwork and whatever.
Are you talking about at the board, like
the
even
border? I'm talking about borders. I'm saying national borders.
Okay.
So yeah, what I'm saying is national borders are wrong because they violate someone's human right or natural right to freely travel.
Okay, and let's say that Mexico is actually, I'm not going to start the thing yet. I'll actually, I want to get your position as far as, are you an anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, anarcho-communist? What is your leaning?
Anarchist is my leaning. So as basically no rulers, no masters. If you, without any rulers or masters, decide through consent that you want to live in a communist society, go for it. That's up to you. I would not join your society because I personally don't think that communist values would build a successful society that would, it's not a group of people that I would want to join with.
Okay, so you are more a free market.
Free market. I would lean towards capitalism, but I think capitalism is a very misunderstood word. So it's a word that just like anarchist. So anarchist and capitalist are two words that people don't understand. People think anarchist means chaos, so it's a lot easier to call yourself a voluntarist, which would be something that I would identify with.
Okay.
If you're talking about true capitalism, and free market capitalism, that's something I also would agree with and identify with. But right now what we have is fascism, where we have corporations who get special deals through the state, and it's
crony capitalism.
Yeah, crony capitalism, fascism.
Yes, I agree with that.
So yeah, I don't really.
Okay, so, and then as far as an ideology, would you consider yourself more an individualist or a collectivist?
Individualist.
Okay.
So that's, thus an anarchist, right?
Okay. Well, there are anarchists who are collectivists. And in fact, Spain became anarchist for a while, and they were a collectivist version of anarchy.
Well, I guess, can you truly be a collectivist and an anarchist?
I wouldn't think so, but they call themselves that.
Right. So it's like the Antifa version of anarchy that's here in the United States, or I don't know how far that type of anarchy is elsewhere in the world.
Okay. And you are a proponent then of the non-aggression principle of the NAP?
Exactly. Yes.
Are you also a proponent of the self-defense principle?
I think that goes right along with the non-aggression principle.
Well, one is the masculine, one is the feminine. The self-defense is the masculine, non-aggression is the feminine. when you look at it from a natural law perspective.
I've never heard somebody mention the self-defense principle, but I understand that as non-aggression, self-defense is obviously non-aggression. So it would go aligned with non-aggression. And I've never thought of self-defense principle being separate from the non-aggression principle.
Okay. And then would you agree that the legal definition of aggression is trespassing? You can trespass against a person or their property.
Right.
Okay. Just for the discussion, trespassing and aggression are going to be synonymous in this discussion.
Well, I guess the legal definition of aggression would be violating someone's consent.
Yes. Well, that's aggression and trespassing.
Right.
If I tell you not to come on my property and you come on my property, that's violating my consent. I did not give you consent to come onto my property.
Right. But I'm saying, as far as a more broader term that covers everything, and trespassing doesn't cover everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But the violating someone's consent would be and through non-aggression, right? So if I were to attack you, right, and you were to shoot me, you would be violating my consent, but it wouldn't be through non-aggression, right? Because I'm the one who violated non-aggression.
Okay, so you attack me, I shoot you, and I'm sorry.
Right. So I'm the one who broke the non-aggression principle.
Yes.
Therefore, even though you violated my consent by shooting me, I do not consent to you shooting me. No matter, and even if have a gun at you, I do not consent to that. You shooting me ever. You violated my consent by shooting me. But I was the one who broke the non-aggression principle.
Right, and I was in self-defense.
Right. So it's
but trespassing is the initial aggression.
Right. So I'm saying you're asking what an aggression was. It's not just violation of consent, but it's violation of consent, and there also has to be the initiation of force as well, because
right. That's actually trespassing. I study common law and Black's law dictionary is, and then aggression in the legal sense means trespassing. So when somebody says you've trespassed on the property, that means you've aggressed against them. You are the first initiator of force. You initiated force through either attacking the person or their property. That's trespassing. The initiator.
Okay. And where is your property?
Where do I live? Like, you mean where do I live physically, or are you saying where is?
What is the boundary lines of your property?
It's a fence. It's a gate.
Right.
A gated property.
Okay.
And then also my person is my property, and then the fruit of my labor is my property. My relationship I've created, my relationship I've put labor into, my relationship with my partner, that is my property, and then it's also her property too. The relationship itself is our joint property, and then our property where we live is our joint property.
Okay.
And also our person is considered, the vehicle is our property.
All right.
That's why the person or property.
And what are your rights?
Rights are inalienable. Privileges are granted by another.
No, but what are your rights? What do you have the right to do?
Generally, I have the right to free speech. I have the right to hold an opinion and to express my opinion. I have the right to defend myself. That's natural because, cats have claws, dogs have teeth, humans have guns. I have the right to self-defense. I have the right to provide for me and my family.
All right. Would you agree with me that you have the right to do whatever you want as long as you don't violate somebody else's consent through aggression?
Yes. So I have the right to travel freely where I'm invited. If I'm not invited into public or private lands, then I'm not then I'm trespassing. So as long as there is consent, either on a public or a private level, then it's okay.
So at what point are you not allowed on public land if you're not invited?
Well, if I'm not invited by if I'm invited by, let's say somebody is invited at the board. Okay, let's look at it from a homeowner association.
Let's look at it from a homeowner, from the very bottom line, because I have a story that happened yesterday.
So I invite somebody on my property, they're allowed. If somebody comes on my property where I didn't ask them to, there's no consent. It's like the mailman. I invite them on my property to give my mail, but only in the context of the mail, right?
Right. Here goes this. That's not the story I was telling you from yesterday.
Okay.
My wife is going out for a walk with my 1-year-old baby. And she's letting him just walk on his own, go where he will. She's following behind him. We live in a back road that gets, the mailman comes down, one car comes. When they come down, they slow down, they stop, they wave, they talk to you. So we're just hanging out, or her and my son are hanging out on the road, and he sees a stick and he starts picking up and playing with it at the neighbor's house. So they're out there on the road for a good 3 minutes, 5 minutes in front of this person's house. They come out and start yelling, "Stop snooping in my house. Stop snooping in my house. You get out of here. You get out of here. You want to get yourself shot?" So this idea that you have the right to public land, you don't. My wife has every right to be on that road and to be walking up and down our road as much as she wants. The public land you have no right to. They have right if they would have been on her property, which she wasn't, right?
I completely agree. That is a
right.
That is,
so the
lack of boundaries, a lack of proper understanding of boundaries on the homeowner's part.
But it's also a lack of proper understanding of boundaries on your own part by saying that you have the right to tell somebody when they can and cannot be on public land. It's not your land. That your boundary, where your fence, that fence that you talked about earlier, where that fence begins on your land and where it ends, that's where you have the right to tell people when they can and cannot be on your property.
I completely agree. So no disagreement yet. Now, the thing is your wife is also a owner of that public land. So she has every right to walk down that public land. So both the homeowner and her are jointly co-creating that public land. It is a joint property. It is public. Therefore, he does not have right to tell her because she also has rights to that public land.
Okay. And somebody at the Mexico border on Highway 5 has the right to stop people there.
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, first of all, you have to look at intent. So you look at, is it free both ways? Mexico is not going to open up their borders to U.S. citizens. So let's say America opens up their borders to Mexican citizens. Completely open one way, but not the other way.
Have you ever been through the Mexican border?
Yes.
Okay. So what was the checkpoint like going to Mexico? What do you mean they're not open to American citizens? I don't remember.
I mean, no, what I'm saying is it's open if you have a passport. I mean, it's open if you
have to show a passport. I walked freely in there.
Really?
Yeah, into Mexico. You walk right through into Mexico. You don't have to show paperwork or do anything.
Canada is also actually one of the most restrictive as well. So Canada and Mexico. I've heard Mexico say, the leader say, at least a current leader, say that there is, illegal immigrants will get basically imprisoned.
All right. And at what point did people gain this right to tell people who and who cannot go into certain parts of the world?
Well, it's Mexicans they have their own government and style of doing things. And then we have our own style and way of doing things, and they're completely different cultures. Now, those cultures can integrate to a certain extent, which you see, and there's always room for incremental immigration in each direction. And also, if somebody is invited into Mexico, they should be given full access. So if I am invited in by a resident there to stay at their house or to work for them or whatever, and to that kind of a thing, then I should have full access. So that's when I say limited borders, it's like, it's always on a voluntary basis. So if I have a company and I want to hire somebody from Mexico because they're the best person for the job, they should be able to cross the border without, just because I call into the gate, so to speak. I'm calling into the gate. I'm letting you know that this person is coming over because I have a contract with that person. It's a voluntary interaction.
So,
like a homeowner. So I've had to do that when I go into a certain gated communities, where you go to the gated community, there's a guard on duty, and you know the resident calls in, says, hey, let this guy in, he's going to be, you know, spending the week with me or whatever.
all right. So this is how's this any different than open borders? If I live on this side of the imaginary line and I say I invite everyone over.
No, it's on
Like,
an individual basis, not a collective basis.
what do you mean?
Well, if you don't know the person and you can't vouch for the person, because it's about taking responsibility. The homeowner takes responsibility for me when I go over there. There is a certain level of responsibility that they are taking. The voluntary interaction implies a certain level of responsibility. I'm vouching for this person, this individual.
Right. So it's the collectivism then. You believe in collectivism for borders.
No, not at all.
Then
I believe there are collective borders, but I am an individualist. There is a collective of individuals in an individualist society, but it's a direction of flow. Do the collective band together because they feel weak to try to impose themselves on the strong, or an individualist or individual strong, and they form into strong communities?
all right. So what
But
is
it's the individual. It's in what way does the community nurture the individual rights, or does the individuals nurture the collective?
all right.
That's the difference.
I think here goes the real question. What is America?
America is a country that is connected together by shared values and a certain agreement.
Okay.
A cultural agreement, a collective agreement. It's not collectivist, but it's like, okay, things scale. And you heard this in my video, that you see like individual personal boundaries, which is, delineating what is my responsibility, what's not my responsibility. Scales to groups, to communities, to states, to nations. And when I say states, like, I would probably be more of an anti-federalist, if you were to take me back to the founding fathers' time. So it's like the states should have more rights than the federal government, and that.
Right, because the federal government doesn't have any rights, nor do states, because only individuals have rights.
They're granted rights they're granted privileges by the individual. So you're right.
Rights are something that are naturally given.
Yes.
To humans.
So, yes, a state in no way has a right. They have privileges based on the rights of the people and what the privileges that the people give to the state. But right now it's flipped, where now it's the government is saying that the people have privileges and not rights. And that flip is very, very detrimental.
But when I say what is America, I mean where does America exist? What is it physically?
I'm unsure what you're trying to ask.
I'm trying to say, what is America?
Well, how about this? How about you tell me what America is in your viewpoint, and then I'll ask you questions based on that. It might be a little easy.
America is a pile of paperwork. It's a corporation.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, I agree. Right now, currently, it is a corporation.
What do you mean right now?
It became a corporation in like 1913 or something like that.
And what was it before then?
It was not a corporation.
What was it?
That is a good question. I don't have the actual answer for you, but it was not a corporation. It became a corporation as a result. The Constitution and the amendments to the Constitution don't actually govern how the government works. It is only a facade right now, because it changed over around the time that income taxes were implemented, and in fact was set up so income taxes could be implemented in the way that they are.
Oh, well, yeah, you're talking about government. Government, government is just people who think they have the right to tell other people what to do.
Yes, that is how it is currently operated, yes.
Yeah, that's what, no, that's what it is. That's what it's
But
always
was
been.
that the intention? Have you read about, I mean, have you read the founding fathers and how they intended it? It was actually the people were sovereign and the government was beholden to the people. But you have to be responsible enough to actually take the burden of that responsibility on yourself to earn sovereignty. Because if you do not govern yourself, somebody will step in to govern you. And so as people stopped governing themselves, the government started doing that for them. But as the government was, or as the people were doing self-government, then the quote government just carried out their wishes. So we've had a flip, and that flip was gradual. It started after the Civil War, and it really took root and hold around the 1913 or something like that, just before World War I.
Right. And that is around the time it took root and took hold,
Mm-hmm.
which is also around the time when they started making people have passports. In 1914 is when it started in Britain, and 1918 is when it started here. Before, people, it was just known as a natural right to be able to freely go places. It's been that way for the longest time. This is a new phenomenon to have border crossing and checkpoints. And what it breeds is the immigration checkpoints, where we have these Nazi checkpoints. I got stopped at one going through Texas. I asked the guy, I said, when did we leave the United States and enter Nazi Germany? Guy says, what are you talking about? If this was Nazi Germany, I'd shoot you. Right? But what would have happened if I would have just took off? They would have chased me down. They would have ran me off the road. They would have killed me, my wife, the cats that were in the truck with me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's exactly what they would have done.
Right.
And it's
I have no problem with your current concerns.
And
I completely agree with them.
The enforcement of borders, because when you have borders, you have the enforcement of borders, which creates the current police state that we have.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, let's look at how is immigration with Ellis Island? Because Ellis Island was obviously an immigration checkpoint, so to speak, for people immigrating legally to the United States long before 1913. It was processing people who wanted to become citizens and who were immigrating into the country.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it was appropriate to be documented.
They didn't have passports at that time, but they were immigrating, making a new name for themselves and making a new home for themselves. They wanted to get ahead. They didn't want to just come to America to get entitlements. They wanted to come here to better themselves, because we were the most free country in the world at that point.
Right. And there's people that immigrated at that point, and there's people that did it with the legal boundaries at that point, but that doesn't mean that it was something. We're talking about what's morally right and what's morally acceptable. Is it morally appropriate to be telling people where they can and cannot go? Is it morally appropriate for you to use force to stop people from moving on one piece of land that's they call it, that's owned by United States government, that this corporation, it's owned by nobody? Is it illegal for these people? Is it something, have they violated anybody's right? At what point do they violate somebody's right? At what point in the Rio Grande River, when they step on shore, is that when they should have violent force taken upon them, someone who's done no harm to anyone? It's when is it appropriate to violate the consent of someone who's done no harm? Because yes, there's been people who have legally immigrated before.
Mm-hmm.
United States was a lot better of a place before 1913.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a corporate state now, but it's always been just paperwork, and it's been the thing about it.
It's paperwork that was based on an agreement of the people who were living there. So it was a set of terms that everybody was happy with. They dialogued about it. They fought about it. They argued. They probably did Socratic dialogue even, because I mean it's been around for 2,500 years. But they hashed it out. They came to a consensus based on everybody's,
well, it was agreement
and stuff like that. So it was a consent form, and this consent form is still binding based on the initial terms. And then this is what we kind of built upon. Now, the problem is that that initial agreement has been degraded and not evolved, so to speak. And that degradation has caused a lot of problems for everybody.
All right. So the problem with your statement is it was an agreement for the signers of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
It was an agreement made by John Hancock, the most well-known one, and whoever else signed it. It's an agreement made by them, not by the whole of the people. Just like the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact, there was something like 70 people on the Mayflower Compact. There was 40 of them that signed the compact, and then there's the rest that decide to remain free.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing. There's other people who not the whole of the people decided to join the corporation. And that was the beginning of it. It was a piece of paperwork. It was a document. It was a contract that they signed, and that's what United States was at that point. And it became a corporate document later on, but it's always just been paperwork. And the paperwork's only been valid to the people who signed that paperwork and have agreed to that contract. And if you wrote up your own Constitution and your own Declaration of Independence and you've signed it, and on your property, you have your declaration of what is your individual property rights and your neighbors that agree with you, and you've signed that document, and you all have that pact, and you're going to stand up, and you're going to get your guns and stand for your rights of your little community, then that's your whatever your states, your whatever. But the Constitution has nothing to do with you. You didn't sign it. You weren't a part of it. It's something that people who are dead sign. It's a dead contract with a bunch of dead people. It has nothing to do with anybody who's alive right now.
Okay, so as soon as you die, property rights do not propagate. Is this true? Or do property rights propagate through lineage and things like that?
No, property rights go on.
Okay, so if they sign these documents and it delineates property rights and who has rights to what, et cetera, and
Which one of these contract signers is in your lineage that makes you a part of this contract?
Nobody.
Okay, so it's not a part of your contract. You're not in this contract.
Okay. Well, I don't have an answer for that, so I'll admit that. I feel like there's something off about it still, but I don't. We'll have to further reflect on it to come up with a response on that later.
The thing that's off about it is that we've always been taught that what the United States is a piece of land between what we know as imaginary line called Mexico, imaginary line called Canada, Alaska up here, Hawaii down here off in the ocean. And that's what we've known as being America, is this piece of land in our mind. And in reality, before 1776, that land still existed there, and nobody even understood of imaginary lines that were there. Mm-hmm. And then it was natural and for people to go up and down there.
I do understand that, and that is an issue, but we have to kind of deal with where we're currently at also. And that's the thing. We can't, we see ideals, and I do think that there were certain ideals that were in place that I really liked about the original founding of the United States. And the agreement that they kind of put into place, I stand along with them in their initial attempt of individuals being sovereign, and that the government was very much defederalized and that kind of thing. But we have an issue because we are here where we are right now.
Yeah, and we're definitely very far from where the founding fathers were. And right. we've been very far from there for a long time.
Right.
This is not like a
something needs to change.
Or Obama or a Bush or a Nixon or
we're talking that you could see things starting to come in even in the 1850s before the Civil War, when they made public schooling mandatory. They started aggressing, and they even started saying that the state was like a mother in Massachusetts with Horace Mann. So, I mean, and then they forced by gunpoint, the Massachusetts National Guard came in and forced at gunpoint students to go to school, forced coercion, public schools. That was a violation of parents' property rights.
All
So,
right.
I mean,
So,
we see that obviously happening even back then in the 1849-50 time period.
all right. So when you think of like your heritage being, or your birthright being to be, I'm from, where are you born? Where are you from?
Kansas City, Missouri.
Kansas City. So you're from Kansas City. You're born there. It's your birthright to be in the United States. And this is something that I definitely went through a phase of this where, as an American, I have these rights. And as, you know what I mean, it's my birthright to be on this piece of land because, and it is my birthright to be on this piece of land. But this piece of land, the imaginary lines don't exist there. It's my birthright to be on the whole thing, the whole entire piece of land. And even Antarctica, where they say you're not supposed to be, it's my birthright to be there too, because I was born on this piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
And even though there's military bases there saying you can't go to Antarctica, it's your birthright to be in there, and they're violating violently your right to go to somewhere that's freezing cold. And I honestly would rather go to Florida than Antarctica.
Yeah.
But
No, I have no problem with free travel, especially when I've been invited.
right, okay,
Like
but
if I've been invited somewhere, like I was invited to Belgium, and I've lived in Belgium for the past 5 years. I was invited here, and that is completely, you know, it is my privilege based on my wife taking responsibility for inviting me. Does that make sense? Like, it is not necessarily my right to be in Belgium. It is my privilege to be in Belgium. But she invited me, so I am her guest, so to speak. And now I'm setting up a home here and creating something with her. And those creations of what we've built together now is my rights.
right, because you're saying your wife is a subject to the corporation of the Belgian government, therefore
No,
she gets her right to
she's
be
not a
there.
subject. I promise you that.
Then how does, okay, so
No,
here,
okay, remember,
here goes a question. Does
yes,
one person have a right that another person doesn't? One individual.
yes, yes, I do not have a right to my wife's body. I have a privilege. She does not have a right to my body. She has a privilege.
Okay, so
So
you
she
both have
gained
the same exact
privileges
right.
to
So
my
you,
body as a result of our agreement together.
exactly. So you and your wife had the same exact rights. You have the right
I
to
have
your
my right to
body,
my body. She has
and
her
she
right
has
to
the
her
right
body.
to her body. You have the same exact rights.
Yes, but it's a privilege to interact with each other's rights. Or,
Well, obviously, yes. That would, even though she's your wife, that would be rape if she didn't consent to
right.
be
It's a
interacting with
privilege.
her. Right. But it goes the other way too, because you have the same rights. She has the privilege of interacting with you.
Yes, and she's an individual who invited me to Belgium, and based on her being an individual who has, you know, property rights, based on not based on what the government says, but based on her own, you know, sovereign identity as a human being, then she can invite me here.
All right. So everybody has the same rights then.
Yes.
All right. So
But it's not my rights over her property, and she doesn't have rights over my property.
right, but I'm not talking about her property or your property, because it's not either of your property.
Mhm.
You're inside of her house right now, yes. So I wouldn't have a right to go into your wife's house, of course.
Right.
That's her
And
property. But I'm not talking about her
and
property.
I have
I'm talking about being outside of the road right here.
yes.
Right,
Okay. So,
where the
but
neighbors,
that's again
and even if I have a video camera and have my P900 zoomed in right on your face, and I'm looking at the moles on your side of your cheek, it's still my right to be out there in the public space.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so I'm not talking about violating your wife's
Yes, but
property.
this is where the public and we really need to come up with a good understanding of the difference between public and private, and what public actually means. So I do have a common law understanding, or I have a quote that I can, or an excerpt from Black's Law Dictionary back in 1910, which still talks about admiralty and all those other kinds of things, but it's about common law and the definition of public. If you'd like to hear it, it's very short. It's only like that long.
Yeah, give it to me.
I can share the screen if you'd like to.
Yeah, do that. And tell me how you're doing, Nick, because I'd like to share the screen on some stuff.
Yeah, on the bottom you can say share screen.
I can see share there.
Okay, I think this is the one public. No, here we go. There we go. Do you see that?
It's kind of blurry. Pertaining to a state, nation, or whole community.
Yes.
Proceeding from, relating to, or affecting the whole body of people or entire community. Open to all. Notorious. Common to all or many. General. Open to common use.
And then if you drop down, a distinction has been made between the terms public and general. They are sometimes used as synonymous. The former term is applied strictly to that which concerns all the citizens and every member of the state, while the latter includes a lesser, though still a large portion of the community. So general and public are not necessarily the same thing. So public is bigger and general is smaller.
All right.
As a noun, the word public denotes the whole body politic or the aggregate of the citizens of a state, district, or municipality. So it's a community thing. It has to do with a joint. I have a privilege to be on the common or the public lands in Belgium through my wife, but it's through my wife that I have those rights or those privileges. But she has the rights. It is her right as somebody born in Belgium, and not again. This is as somebody who is sovereign, at least in energy, not necessarily legally yet, but that is something we're working on. Somebody who has, I mean, theoretically, she has rights to this area.
All right. So when do you believe that it's right to violate the consent of someone who's done nothing wrong?
Okay, but you're going to have to define who has done nothing wrong. Is somebody who's
someone who swam over the Rio Grande? So by wrong, okay. So we talked about right and wrong earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have the right to do anything that you want.
I'm going to, by the way, stop shooting.
As long as it doesn't, your rights are you have the right to do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't violate the consent of somebody else.
As long as it does not, yes, as long as it does not trespass on public or private lands. I can, as an American citizen, I cannot trespass legally on American lands, on public lands in America, right? Public lands you can't trespass, but you can trespass on public lands if you're not invited to another area like Canada. Canada has very strict border controls.
Okay, okay, are your rights, is it your right to be in the public space in the United States?
In the United States, yes.
That's your right.
And also in Belgium. I have a privilege in Belgium. I have a right in America. Okay.
And your rights change depending on, because your right is granted to you by the state, the United States, for being there?
The right is inherent because of my birth there.
Your right is inherent because of your birth.
Yes, there.
Well, that's where you're going wrong. Your right is inherent because of your birth, because the imaginary lines don't exist. That's a construct that people have told you that exists.
Okay, so what you're saying is that public lands
are the right for people to travel and to be on freely.
Okay, so
and we don't
your idea of public lands is that there is no, even Russians could drive a tank down your street if they wanted to. As long as they're not shooting a cannon through your house, they could drive tanks up and down the street as much as they wanted because it's public.
Well, I wouldn't want anyone driving a tank, right? So United States military is driving tanks down our streets. We live about 10 miles from Air Force Base over here. They're driving tanks down our streets all the time, right? I don't want anyone driving Humvees and whatever else. I driving military planes over top of us. You think I want them driving planes that have the capability of dropping bombs on people over top of me? That happens all the time, right?
And
so
I'm a firm believer, obviously, that the citizenry, not citizenry, but the public, the people. I don't like the word citizen, but I'm a firm believer that the people should have equal arms. They should have the ability to defend themselves to any degree that the technology out there is out there. So, governments should not have a monopoly on anything. And in fact, the government shouldn't have the weapons, and it should be the people that have all the weapons, in my mind.
Right. And if I agree with you on that.
Yeah, citizen Air Force, that kind of stuff.
Right. And the first response is, well, you think you have the right to have a nuclear arm? No, of course I don't think I have the right to have a nuclear arm. Nobody has the right to have nuclear arms. Why would you have the right? How are you defending by blowing up a giant city? You're not defending anything. You're not defending your ground, your property. You're not defending anything at all. You're attacking somebody, and it's extremely violent, aggressive. Nobody has the right to have, it's such a BS response to you should have anything the military should have.
I obviously wouldn't get rid of all the nukes at this point, if there was somebody, so if you're talking about a Russian tank going down my road, if there was somebody that was Russian going down a tank in my road, that was my neighbor, or if it was somebody who was Ukrainian or Mexican or Canadian or from Missouri, I would feel just as comfortable, probably a little more comfortable if they were Russian, because it would probably be my father-in-law or my mother-in-law that was driving the tank. If they were in my front lawn driving the tank. Let's say the Russian government decides to say, hey, they have open borders, it's public lands, let's send our military there and just hang out. I mean, it's public lands, right? But you have to make a distinction somewhere. Where do you draw the line? This is called the argument to absurdity. I'm taking an absurd argument to try to find where we can draw the line of where is it reasonable to say public lands belong to the people and not all the people.
Well, your argument is anarchy can't work because there's big governments out there that are too strong for individuals to be able to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm. But it has to start somewhere and spread from there. So if it starts here, we have to have some kind of defensive capability to be able to stand in our power, stand in our rights, so that the ideals of liberty are able to spread.
So how in the world would the Russian government, or why would the Russian government want to attack us if we weren't forcing them to buy and trade all their oil in the U.S. dollar? Why, if we don't have them, because
have you ever heard of envy? Have you ever heard I'm not saying Russians are going to do that. I'm using Russians as an example, but there are envious people out there in the world. And envious people like to use your own freedoms against you, to push the limits covertly so that they can eventually have you. And you have to be able to understand ideological subversion. You have to be able to understand that they use our own liberties against us in order to say, well, this is just my right? And then they keep pushing the line a little bit, until which point you're screwed.
All right,
and you have to find a line and draw it somewhere. And that is the public land belongs to this country.
Why are you afraid of being attacked?
I'm not. I just understand healthy boundaries.
Okay.
Healthy individual boundaries and how it scales.
What do you think happened on September 11th, 2001?
I believe that the U.S. government perpetrated something against its own people, or at least elements of, in order to justify a problem reaction solution.
Okay, and then after that, what happened with the boundaries known as the borders? Did they get weaker or stronger on their stance on the borders after 9/11? After they attacked their own people?
They got ridiculous.
Right.
And
so the same exact thing. Okay, and they told us that the terrorists hated our freedom. So United States government attacks its own country, attacks those buildings, right? Causes them to be demolished, and then a building a couple blocks down. Yeah, that fell too. What the heck? It was part of fire on the bottom basement, fell down. That happens all the time. So that happens. And then they tell us that there's people that hate our freedoms. So what do we need to do? We need to start having checkpoints at TSA, make sure we don't get any bad people in there. We need to start getting checkpoints at the border. We need to start having passports whenever we go in and out of Canada. Now, before we didn't have them going there, we need to, it starts going.
I'm for extremely relaxed borders, but there still has to, look, I'm not against borders, or I'm not against opening the borders to a reasonable extent.
But do you understand what you're saying?
When the country is, when you're bordering something that is, how do you say this? It's fine when it's reasonable. It's not fine when it's unreasonable. It has to be a voluntary interaction. And removing safety. See, the problem is people aren't governing themselves. And then because they aren't smart enough to govern themselves, they're not responsible enough to self-govern. Now people come in to govern them, and then they play them like a violin. It's like, what's going on, what you're explaining is, playing everybody like a violin. I'm not saying,
right. People are being played like a violin.
Yes.
And what's happening is they're keeping up their plan in the Middle East. They're bombing the shit out of people, right?
Yes.
They're paying for
That's
their
aggression, by the way. The U.S. is being aggressive. They are trespassing on other people's land.
Right. They're paying for boats to send these people to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And then after they're scaring these people out of their own land, giving them the fare to get them to a safer place, and their culture integrates with a culture that's opposite of them, they say, oh, look how terrible immigration is. Nobody wants to come to your country. They just want to stop getting bombed.
Right.
Nobody's trying to.
Well, but also there's a socialist aspect to these countries. Being here, I understand this problem quite intimately. And the forced integration is not good for anybody. Multiculturalism is violence. It is aggression. It is trespassing. But it's not these people that are coming up with these Paul started the EU back in the day. I forget his name. I think it starts with like
multiculturalism is violence, is aggression. That's the last thing I heard. Then so.
Oh yeah. So multiculturalism, I think, is trespassing. It is aggression, but it's being perpetrated by people's own governments, right? And so what you explained is definitely correct. I'm against that kind of immigration, but that's immigration that's being forced on us by our very own government in order to, at least according to the founder of the EU, or the guy who put in the most energy into creating the EU back in the 30s and 40s. He was basically wanting to create to lower the IQ of Europe by about 10 points to create a separation between the ruling class and the people. So there is a sense of...
Wait, he wanted to lower the IQ by doing what?
By interbreeding the lower, or the people, and then keeping the financial elite and stuff like that, quote, pure.
Right, but we've seen how that all the incest with the elite ended up working out for them anyways.
Right, I know.
So it's not actually this genetic purity idea.
Well, they are
work out. Trying to keep your genes pure is going to turn your kid into being like the elite's inbreeds.
Right, but see, forced integration is different than incremental integration. Like when I go through and I have to work through a problem, it's very easy when I do it in incremental steps. And I'm a daily reflector. I reflect on a daily basis about life, about myself, about my place in it, about the world, that kind of stuff. When done incrementally, it's very easy to integrate. But when it's forced upon you because, the world just like comes crashing down on you, or you have this giant event, then it is very, very, very difficult to go through. And what's happening is this forced integration is just by opening up all the borders and encouraging, giving them the fare to come over, is harming the environment, harming the culture, harming, this thing. So I'm for diversity. I'm not for forced diversity. Right. I'm for diversity of ideas. I'm not for a forced diversity of ideas. I'm for diversity of cultures and being able to travel between cultures and getting invited there to do tourism and stuff like that. I think that's great. I'm not okay with, attempting to force cultures together and making them coexist side by side without letting them gradually integrate.
I agree that there shouldn't be forced immigration, but I don't think that's what we're talking about here, and that is what's happening. And the idea of what I'm talking about is not being afraid of immigration. And what you're talking about is that people will take advantage of your freedom. And this is the same, my point about 9/11 is what you're saying here is the same post 9/11 rhetoric that the United States government said but but they were the ones who perpetrated that crime. We never even got attacked. They got all these people afraid of, you know what I mean? We're afraid of Russia. We've never even been attacked by terrorists. They made that up. They blew up those buildings. That wasn't planes that caused them to crash like that.
So can you please tell me how I'm saying the exact same thing?
Because you're saying that if we let people come in, they're going to take advantage of our freedoms, and they're going to come in here and they're going to destroy our culture, and we got to be afraid of this, we got to be afraid of these people.
I'm saying forced integration is bad. I'm saying forced integration is bad. I'm saying gradual immigration is always fine. And
right, but open
borders, I think that all interactions should be voluntary, and that if you're not invited, then, and you're not here to, gradually, integrate into society, or, to an extent in a healthy fashion, then it's not good. I mean, it's actually, there's been studies done that multiculturalism is actually damaging. I have actually some quotes from it that I copied for this from a guy who is actually a leftist who is a proponent of multiculturalism and open borders.
The thing is, I agree with you about forced integration, but open borders is not forced integration. Bombing people is forced integration. Scaring them out of their homeland is forced integration, right? So it's not, you shouldn't be talking about closing your borders. You should be talking about leaving them the hell alone.
Well, I think that's important too.
Right,
I think that's an important thing, and I'm glad you brought it up. But I don't think there's anything wrong with what you're saying.
The issue I have is where you want to initiate force on people that are leaving an area based on the violence that's happening to them that you in fact are paying for. So you're paying to bomb somebody, and then you're upset that they want to come move next to you. And you can't get away from paying it. If you're a U.S. citizen, you're stuck to the income tax. Even if you're in Brussels, they're going to extort it out of you, right? And if I'm living here, as much as I hate it, I'm paying for it too. Every time I go out shopping, every time I get my paycheck at the end of the week, I got a couple $100 going to help support the people bombing these people and the forced integration that's happening. So
what if, and also a lot of the people that they're bringing here, they're hoping to, to get to vote for their status stuff, right?
Right.
And so they're forcing this integration and then converting them to, quote, Democrats, or at least getting them to vote a couple of elections, and giving them entitlements and handouts and stuff like that, so that the weight of, at least here, we are, Belgians are footing the bill for, all these children that are coming over with their parents and stuff like that. And they get a house, they get paid money, and they also get paid extra money for each child that they have. So it's like, again, that's stealing from the people and so that kind of stuff I'm definitely against. I want that done. I don't want the forced integration.
All right. So we're talking about what's morally right and what's morally wrong here. And you're talking about extorted money, getting money extorted from you and given to somebody else that didn't get money extorted from them.
Yeah.
So, but it's morally wrong for you to get the money extorted from you in the first place.
Of course.
So it's
taxes or theft. I mean, that's
right. The discussion I'm having here is not what is the Republican or Democrat way to solve what's happening in the United States. What I'm talking about is what's morally right and what's morally wrong. So the excuse that somebody's stealing money from you, and this money that they're stealing from you is getting used for somebody to go to school that isn't getting money stolen from them, is a terrible excuse. Nobody should be having money stolen from them in the first place.
Yes. But how am I using this as an excuse? How you have to demonstrate how I'm using it as an excuse.
Well, you just said earlier that they're coming here and they're collecting these different benefits that they're not paying for. And that's why you're opposed to immigration.
No. I'm just not okay with that. That's not why I'm opposed with it. I'm opposed to that in general. But multiculturalism obviously is aggressive, and it's being perpetrated by the governments, and that needs to stop.
You're opposed to illegal immigrants collecting welfare.
Yes.
Right.
I'm opposed to welfare in general.
And,
I mean, I think it should be a voluntary thing, not involuntary.
but for your reasoning for being opposed to borders, one of your reasonings for being opposed to borders is not that illegal immigrants collect welfare checks. Is that, because that's how I understood it.
It's a symptom.
Or, and which they don't
I
actually
mean,
collect
if people are
welfare
coming
checks,
in,
but they do
again,
send
if
their kids
people
to
are
school
coming
on other
in to make
welfare.
a better life for themselves, they were invited in, somebody says, hey, I've got a job for you. Can you come work for me? Great. Like, I mean, I think that the agreement between the employer and the person should be enough to allow them in.
Why do you get the right to tell somebody what a better life for themselves is? What if a better life for them is walking across Yellowstone National Park? What if a better life for them is, you know what I mean? Like, what if the better life for them is coming up where it's colder and they want to have a snow removal business and start their own business? What if it is they
That's
don't
been
need a
happening
job
for
because
that's been happening for hundreds of years.
a lot of them come and start landscaping businesses. Why do they need to have a job up here if they're going to come start a better life for themselves and start their own landscaping business? Why isn't that good enough to make a better life? Like, who gets to dictate what a better life for somebody?
There's been lots of immigrants who come in and do that. Exactly. That exact. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. You said if they want to make a better life for themselves and get a job. Well, if they want to make a better life for themselves and
start a business,
whatever it is that they think make a better life for themselves is, and whatever they decide a better life for themselves is, and wherever position on the earth they decide making a better life for themselves would be, it's
they have to be able to do it in a voluntary manner. So it's like maybe ideally in the end there will be fairly open borders and then a lot of public space, but it's like I'm also looking at the realistic of how do we get to there, and we have to start somewhere, and we're going to have to first, I mean, we're going to have to stop the taxation thing. We're going to have to stop, the tyrants and the authoritarians and that kind of stuff, or bombing people and forcing them here. I mean, all those things, you're going to have to, have some kind of a reasonable thing to deal with drug cartels and the CIA or helping them, in Mexico and Latin America. I mean, all these things are issues. We don't want all that stuff spilling into America to that degree.
Right. And these are all,
so, I mean, you have to work towards that, and you have to have a starting point.
These are all issues that are created by that line. These are all issues that are created by, on one side of the line, them having an aggressive war on drugs, which makes the cartel down there making tons of money on a plant that helps people with their anxiety and helps people go to sleep and helps them eat, and a multitude of other things this plant helps people with, but is for some reason illegal in a lot of places. So the cartel makes a bunch of money off it. Or the United States government makes a bunch of laws about guns. The cartel, they make guns, they sell them to people up here. They make a bunch of
those are obviously not, those aren't connected to the border issue. Those are connected to that's connected to the stuff that's going on in the United States from the CIA and from the government and authoritarianism. So we obviously need to deal with that. But until then, we just can't just, open everything up. I mean, if you had your way and they were to open up the borders completely tomorrow, how would you be with them completely opening up both Canada and the southern borders, and anybody can pass in, anybody can pass out? How would you feel about that right now in this moment?
Why do you think there's so many people that are trying to cross at these border spots that aren't getting in and out in the giant fields that go all the way across for thousands of miles? I don't think there'd be much of a change. There might be a bigger influx at the border on that one particular day, but it's not going to be as big of a problem as you think. And if in the end, if a bunch of people came over and started sucking from the welfare system and caused the United States government to collapse because of the welfare system, well, that's the eventual end of the United States government anyways. It's a debt Ponzi scheme that's going to collapse. If that's what causes it to collapse, that's your fault for joining and believing in the debt Ponzi scheme. Maybe you should have.
That's the intended goal. That's the intended goal. The intended goal is to have a United States of America that includes Canada and Mexico. with the intent of creating a one. I mean, they want that, and then they're going to go to what's called communitarianism. Communitarianism is a kind of like a false anarchy, where everybody serves the community rather than the community serving the individual.
Right. Their intended goal is to have a one world government at one point, which they already have.
Yeah, it has to, but it's going to be more open borders because, I mean, from what I understand, I haven't verified this yet, but before the Civil War, borders were a little tighter even in America because everything was decentralized. And once things kind of centralized, then they connected everything. So, and Europe used to have closed borders. Now they have open borders because the abomination, that's the EU. And they're obviously trying to create no borders all over the whole world because then it's one plantation.
Right. I'm not disagreeing with you that the end goal is for a one world government where everybody is a subject to
with completely open borders
to the world government, or not completely open borders. They'll have completely closed borders. That everybody with the paperwork and with the chip or with the whatever else is allowed to get through. Everybody who is a complete slave. It's going to
they have to open it up
completely closed borders.
But I mean, like in Europe, United States, Europe, you can travel freely now. And in Europe, in the EU, you used to be able to travel freely. You had borders between each nation. But they opened that up through through the EU monster that it is. So it's like you see them going there, and it's like I'm not going to align with the globalist ideals until we get rid of globalism, and then we can start opening things up a little better and have more voluntary interactions. So, I mean, I'm still again trying to deal with what's here and right now, and see how if we just start advocating for open borders right now, just with it's strictly immoral to have closed borders. It's completely moral to have open borders. Then with that black and white thinking, without the nuance of realizing what's going on right now and how open borders actually helps this one world globalization, everybody being subject to an aristocracy or however they're going to work it. I don't want that. We need to find the nuance and be able to say yes, but, and no, but. It's not immoral, moral. It's finding the nuance.
Right. So when you're afraid of lining up with globalist ideals and a one world government, what they want when they want open borders is the exact opposite of what I'm talking about. They want everyone to be a subject to some form of government, to one form of giant government. What I'm talking about is you being an individual and having the right to do whatever you want. And that means to freely travel. Your right to freely. So you talk about you're sovereign, right?
Working at it, at least. At the very least, I'm working at it. Like, I mean, I can talk big, but it's not my complete reality yet.
And what do you mean by that?
Like, it's obviously within my sovereign rights for certain things, but try to walk as a sovereign and do as you wish. And it's not necessarily the same thing.
Okay. So
like, I mean, there's a theory behind it and then there's the application. In theory, I'm a sovereign. In application, it's going to be a little bit more difficult because of the reality we exist in.
All right. I think in reality, if you understand that you have all of your rights, then you are indeed sovereign. Now, the fact that there's people out there who will violate those rights doesn't take away from the fact that you're sovereign. It doesn't take away from the fact that you have rights and not privileges. So it's like the person who's captive and being abused right now somewhere, right? Somewhere that's happening. that person still has all of their rights because they were naturally granted to them.
Yes, of
That's
course.
it. But all of those rights are being violated because they're chained, they're getting beaten, whatever else, they're not getting fed properly. Their rights are being violated, but their rights still exist inside of them as a human. They have these rights. They're just being violated. So it's
Yes,
either
and they don't know how to act as a sovereign. They
right.
don't, in many cases, don't even realize they have these rights within
So
them.
so you may not have your paperwork filled out with the local government, the people who think they have control over you, to tell them that you are not a United States citizen, but that doesn't take away from the fact that you indeed are sovereign.
Yes,
So
but I mean, me trying to enforce that, you know, I have to be able to adequately defend myself, or create a reality where I don't even have to defend myself. You know,
right,
and
so I am sovereign.
mhm,
I have the right to go out on the road and travel freely without a license and a permission from a government agency,
mhm.
right? I still carry a driver's license in my pocket with me because there's somebody out there with a gun who will violently
Yes,
transgress against me for going down the road, for traveling freely.
right. And it
So
is our responsibility to take what we are and to help reality to reflect who we are. Because right now, reality is not reflecting the sovereignty. It is reflecting us as subjects. And so we have to change who we are, our belief sets, our structures, our ideologies, and work through them through self-reflection, philosophy, emotional processing, learning how to set and enforce healthy boundaries, in our individual relationships. Because if you don't know how to enforce healthy boundaries in your individual relationships, or if there's any way you're still acting like a collectivist individually and privately, then you're going to also be subject to how others treat you. And so it's like it's a process. You have to work to make the outside reality reflect this new internal, or this, the base state, because we have all these layers of false reality built in, false beliefs built on top of that core reality. And so it is a process of working to that point, and not something that's just black or white. That's why you're saying that you still carry a driver's license, because it's not black or white. The reality is that you could be, shot or coerced or thrown in jail and that kind of thing if you try to enforce your sovereignty fully.
right, well, it is that black and white. It is a violation of my rights
Yes.
for them to turn on their red and blue lights as a threat that if I don't get on the side of the road, they're going to attack me. Right?
Yeah.
That's a violation of my rights. And I have this not because it's not a black and white issue. That is very clear, a violation of my rights. I have this because I know that these people have been trained that if I don't have it, to lock me up in a cage and violate my rights more, or point a gun at me, and whatever else they're going to do. If I explain to them the reality of how they violated my rights, then they will continue to violate my rights and aggress on me even stronger. And I understand this reality. So that's why I carry this. But it is black and white that they're violating my rights, because I understand what my rights are.
Yes, of course, that part. It's the morality of it is I have rights, but the reality is that we have to find a way to build the bridge, and you cannot just build the bridge, or you can't just pretend you're there when you're not actually there. They call that the pre-trans fallacy. You have three states. You have the pre-rational state, the rational state, and the trans-rational state. And many people, you see all these people walking around saying how enlightened they are, but they actually haven't done any of the self-work or the inner work to get to that state. Both the pre and the trans-rational state have no rationality in them, because they're both, or they actually, the trans-rational state has it embedded within it, but it is not outwardly appearing as rational. So it's like you have to get to heaven. You're building a bridge to heaven, but you have to build the bridge, and the bridge is the process. We have to process our way to this new location. So we have the ideal, but we can't just pretend we're at the ideal. We have to build a bridge to the ideal.
Okay, so I
Do
agree
you
that
agree with
there.
that?
I agree that there will be a process to getting to a point where we live in a peaceful society of anarchism.
Yes.
There will be a process to get to that point, but I don't agree that we need to compromise our values when telling people about what your actual rights are, because right now state lines exist, because right now people are aggressing force, because right now bombs are happening over here. I think we should still tell people what the actual, I think we should stay principled and tell people what the truth is, what their actual right is. It is your right to freely travel, and there's people with guns who will transgress against you and violently offend you. It's your right to freely travel, but there's people with guns who steal your money, and they're not stealing money from other people.
Yes.
So this will affect you negatively because there's people with guns who are violently aggressing against you.
So can I ask you a question? Let's say that in your perfect world, there is lots of anarchism, but there's also pockets of people that voluntarily go into, say, communist society. So let's say that the society is the size of Rhode Island or whatever, or maybe the size of New York or something like that. So this is a public thing based on their public. They put boundaries around their community. They decide to defend it. They have their communal system running, and they have the right to do that, correct?
Right.
So if we try to go on their public lands, and they don't believe in property rights, it's all public, they create a state for themselves. Are we allowed onto their, even though it's our right to travel freely, are we allowed to travel freely within their commune?
Where's this commune keeping you from going?
Onto their property. It's the size of a state.
Okay. If somebody owns a piece of property the size of the state, and all the people,
Or no, the group does. This collection of people do, and they've all decided they want a
and all the
communist.
property owners in there consent to that.
But then the public land, there is, quote, public land that you're not allowed on because they've said it's all theirs.
Oh yeah, if you want to get through the public land, they'd be violating your consent to travel through that state. Yeah. If somebody's saying, if it's a piece of land that they don't own and they're saying that they have the right to violently not let somebody do something on that piece of land that they don't own, then yes.
Like, so a corporation or a group of people buy up all the land, but they're still, but I mean, it's just like, basically it's a giant gated community the size of a state.
In an anarchist community, there is no corporations, because what is a corporation except the government's approval for your business? Right? So there is no corporations buying up land. There's only individuals.
So a bunch of individuals who buy up the land using all their capital. And then So they use that system to buy it all.
And they own that, yeah, and then they close off the land that they own, and they don't want anyone on their land.
Mm-hmm. So what is the difference between if a bunch of anarchists also do that because they're surrounded by somewhat hostile countries? Or we close it down to people from hostile countries?
It's where you get into the point where you have people who don't own property, and they're saying they have the right to tell people what they can do on something that they don't own.
But what if they start trying to buy up all the property in that area so that they can eventually take it over?
That's what I'm saying. If you have someone who's able to do that, of course, you're not able to have giant corporation takeovers if you don't have governments that are printing tons of money and giving it to Elon Musk to go send cars to outer space and giving it to whoever else. So billionaires don't exist without, like, Donald Trump's a billionaire. He's a billionaire for why? Because he had a bunch of apartment complex in New York City that the government granted him the right to build. The government granted him that right. No, he's a corporate Ponzi scheme operator like the rest of them, who got a bunch of money given to him by the government. And he's a billionaire now, just like Elon Musk, just like every other billionaire who gets different types of grants from governments. And the ability for corporations to take over giant piece of land wouldn't exist without the government. The ability for people to be able to print imaginary pieces of paper and grant it worth, you'd have to actually produce something of value to be able to say that you have value to offer somebody. You wouldn't just be able to say, I've given me these 5 billion notes of value and now I'm going to buy the land. No, you'd have to go and dig up some silver out of the ground or gold, or you'd have to go and build a house or
over time though, what's happened is over time this has happened. So America started off as close to a anarchy as has ever happened in the world. Right.
And that was at its purest state.
Yes. Yeah. And it's gradually, using the term gradualism, has been eroded from within to the point where now the state has turned on the people. Right?
I don't think it was that gradual. I think it happened very quick, and people have been.
Well, I mean, there's certain milestones like the formation of a central bank. The Federal Reserve, that was a big thing. Obviously, the formation of the IRS during the Civil War. The slaves were not freed as a result of the Emancipation Proclamation. Just everybody was lowered to the status of serf or slave.
There we go. That's the moment.
Yeah. So the Civil War is really what screwed.
It was a complete slavery of the whole society.
Yeah. And then we really kind of found it out.
Amendment.
And it really became official around I keep saying 1913, but I don't think that's the right year, but somewhere around that time it became official.
No, you're right. The Federal Reserve was founded in 1913.
Okay. Federal Reserve, and then the IRS doing the income tax.
All right. Yeah. I don't know what year they start that. But yeah, they've been progressively screwing people. Or you could go to I think it was 1876 when they devalued silver. That was a big.
I'm losing you. I'm sorry.
Oh, I said that you type in the crime of an 18 something, it'll show up in Google. But they devalued silver. I think it was like 1878 or something.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge one. But yeah, the point is. We are very, very far gone,
yes,
as a society, and
we have to find a way to build a bridge back to that, and also build in safeguards from even that the gradual thing happening.
Right. I think one of the importance on building this bridge or building our way, getting our way back to an area of where people have individual freedom and liberty is to stay, even though you understand that there's going to be people who may take a road of going down libertarianism before they understand that libertarianism is still a form of statism, and they're still voting, and they're still promoting a statist agenda with libertarianism. Although there may be people who go down that road before they realize that there shouldn't be any rulers, there shouldn't be any masters, and that the government is an immoral system, that voting is an immoral way of forcing people it's an immoral way of forcing minorities to do things. It's democracy is a violation of the consent of minorities. It's where you get 51% of the people telling 49% of the people what they can and cannot do. And it's I don't think that we should, as we tell people there may be a path to get to freedom, right? There may not be just a awakening where it just spreads like crazy. You're the hive collective, you say, or something like that, right?
No, divine pollination hive is definitely not a hive collective.
or
it's about individuality.
Right, but the idea of ideas spreading like a hive and is kind of what spreading out.
You want a grassroots spreading, but not astroturfing. And the problem is astroturfing is often made to look like grassroots. So when everybody's calling for, quote, open borders, and we're being astroturfed, because yes, open borders are a good idea to a certain extent. There is a line that needs to be drawn somewhere And also we have to take into account everything else that needs to be dealt with first before open borders happens. And we can't really open up all the borders right away without dealing with the cancer that is affecting everything, because you need certain boundaries. I mean, my clothes are a boundary. My skin is a boundary. My skin boundaries and covers my, my tissue and my organs and stuff like that. My shirt, is a boundary that protects my privates and that kind of thing. And my fence around my door is another boundary, and the fence around my house is another boundary. And there is a healthy sense of boundaries. And then my shirt only comes off, and my pants come off in certain situations where I'm alone or with my partner who is privileged to, to experience me. But we have to find the nuance and not just say, yes, open up all the borders and it's immoral, and then find ourselves aligning with, statists who have a high degree of wanting to increase the powers of the state through opening the borders. And so we have to build the bridge in a process-based way and not try to bypass the process. And that's my concern. I'm just trying to say, bring back the process and not bypass. And I'm not saying you're doing this. I'm saying that in general, I see way too many people just saying open borders, you have to have open borders, otherwise you're a statist. And it's like, whoa there, partner, you're making the pre-trans fallacy. You're jumping from where, from the ideal that you have as an idea, and you're jumping all the way to the completion phase without the process of dealing with everything that needs to be dealt with to actually make that a reality. That needs to happen to make it a safe reality so that liberties are protected the whole way.
All right. So what I can agree with you on, and what I think you're trying to say is, right now, with the way things exist and the way the government aggresses on people,
yes,
that open borders are not manageable. They're not appropriate, and they wouldn't work out well for the people with the current structure of the United States government.
Yes.
But morally, if you don't own a piece of property, you don't have a right to tell somebody if they can or cannot come on and off that piece of property. And borders morally are wrong. But in the current construct, because there's other moral wrong things going on, like there is bombing going on in the Middle East, causing people to come over here. So because there's other moral things going on wrong, then the moral thing wrong with borders is something that you think should exist until the other moral things are fixed.
Yeah, and also we need to get rid of the cultural communism that's going on with cultural Marxism, because that's also contributing to this whole thing. The whole tolerance, cultural Marxism thing, which is really just veiled Marxism, where they're taking Marxist ideas and they just copied it, paste onto culture. And that's not a good idea, because that's a further eroding our liberties in the name of love, light, safety, in the name of freedom. Really, they're eroding liberties in the name of freedom.
And in the end of the day, the most free thing and the most open to the rights of individuals is open borders.
Except for the community, and it has to be voluntary interaction again. I mean, if I have a gated community where I am paying rights to this gated community, right? So I'm paying a homeowners association fee, and I have my property and stuff like that, and then I have a gated community, and then only people who, I call people in and invite them into my property. That's still okay, It's like, but because there is public lands based in the homeowners association, and then there's private lands based in the homeowners association. So I'm saying it's certain there is a nuance there that we should also try to integrate. But for the most part, yes, I mean, at a certain point there should be some wide open spaces.
Well, it's still private property inside of those gated communities.
It's just but the pub there is
it's owned by homeowners. It's owned by
the collective of homeowners.
Right.
Yes, and I would just say that if America is sovereign, which it's not, but if Americans in general, because it's not America that's sovereign, it's the Americans themselves that need to be sovereign, that are not claiming their sovereign rights, that are not claiming their birthright. But if they were to claim their birthright and they were to be sovereign, then they would have the right to, sorry, just knocked over my mic. They would have the right to to have public lands and to, call people into, that are owned by them. If
But, but you
like a
look at,
highway is private, like for example, we say who would build the roads? Well, private companies would, right? We don't need the government to build roads. We could build the roads just fine without them. And then,
right.
but then you would put a lot of those roads would become toll roads, right?
Well, but then you realize that private companies are already building the roads. You're just getting taxed, and the government's taking a little money out of it, and then paying a huge
Yes.
fee to this company, and you're paying 3 times more than you would. Plus,
Right. I mean, but when you look at the roads, and if you put a toll on it, is it moral to put a toll on the roads if it's completely publicly owned and privately owned?
you're already putting a toll on the roads.
Okay.
They put a toll on the roads every single time.
But is it moral?
Yes,
Is it moral? Well, obviously it's not moral when the state does it, but is it moral when when private individuals who publicly own the land or privately own the land and they make it used to public who wants to pay the toll? Is that okay?
yeah, it's their land that you're driving on someone's piece of land, and you're paying to drive through their piece of land.
Mm-hmm. But it's probably like a collection of individuals' private land. It's not just one individual that owns all that land. It is going to be a collection of, individuals, right?
Is this a common way that's already established?
No, but we want to get there.
Yeah, if it's already public established common way, you can't close down public established common ways like by putting up a DUI checkpoint or immigration checkpoint. That's a violation of someone's rights, or putting up
Right.
a toll point. But at the same point, it's or the tolls. If it depends on how the individuals who own each. I mean, if it's fully owned by individuals, this piece of land, it depends on how they decide they want to maintain their road.
Owned by different individuals, different segments to be owned by different communities. You know what I'm saying? Like, and each community is built up of individuals.
So if every individual in that community consents to the toll, as that's how they're going to keep up with the road in front of their house, then yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's moral.
Right, if it's done through consent.
Yes, and then people have to pay the toll to actually use that road.
Right.
And they have the right to say, no, you cannot use my road. That's what I'm trying to say with borders. That if all of a sudden America becomes all private property, and then groups of individuals, own segments of these roads, then it's like then you would come up with ways of getting people payments for what they own of these roads when they're used, or find some kind of a way to keep them up from a free market standpoint without the need of government. But
right. So my original point was the borders where and how they exist right now are morally wrong.
Yes, I agree.
If you're not violating the consent of somebody, and you of any of the property owners that if this is all land that's owned by these individuals, and all the individuals who own this land agree to these terms, then you haven't violated the consent of any of these property owners. But when you talk about nation borders, you're talking about land that nobody owns. You're talking about open deserts that people are walking through. You're talking about public roads, like giant highways that connect large portions of huge pieces of land together, and you're just talking about the free travel of people. It's just a common. It's like I feel like if we went back a couple thousand years ago and people saw what was going on right now, maybe even a few hundred years ago, some places people would think this was okay, but in some places people would look at it and be like, what the heck? Even the Canadian geese can come down here without getting checked. The animals have more rights. The whales are traveling thousands of miles every day, but yet a human can't even walk across these imaginary lines because some other human with guns told them that they would violently aggress on them if they did. It's I think they would look on it and say that how is it that these Canadian geese are able to come down here and poop all over our lakes, and we're not sending them back up to Canada? But but people have to come and have special paperwork with different holograms on them and everything else.
Yeah, I think that's bullshit. As it currently stands, it's immoral. I remember being able to go over the border in Canada, and I enjoyed it. You know, my grandparents just showed their driver's license, so to speak, and we went over and we went to an amusement park that was in Canada from Michigan. And it was like kind of on an island that was connected to Canada. And I enjoyed that. And then another time I tried to go over to Canada, and they treated me like a piece of meat and were screaming at me and telling me that I was not going to enter into their Canada, even though I had a passport and everything. I mean, it was ridiculous. It's gotten really authoritarian and authoritarianism.
But that's what happens when you give people the right to violently aggress and tell certain people who and who cannot come, and they start making different, you know what I mean? If they're of, you know, the fact is you don't have the right to choose who your neighbor is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you compare, or you say that multiculturalism is something that is morally wrong, right?
Because it's aggressive and it's psychological.
Because it's aggressive and it's it's aggressive and it's forced on you or whatever. Or the way it's forced on you, I agree, is wrong, because they're bombing people and forcing these people into other people's cultures. But multiculturalism isn't wrong when your Muslim neighbor buys a house next to you. You have no right to not live next to gay, Muslim, black, pedophile, whatever else it is that you want to live next to. You do have the right to say, there's a gay, black, Muslim pedophile living next to me. I'm going to move to this area. But you don't have the right to choose who your neighbor is. So, and you don't have the right to tell people when they can't be on property that doesn't belong to you. And you don't have, you have the right to do whatever you want, as long as you're not violating other people's right. Which one of those is to freely travel, to go wherever you want, see what you want to see the world, explore.
Now, but you also realize, and I just want to put that in, that people do tend to congregate together as birds of a feather. And forced integration means that birds who aren't of a feather are now congregating together. And the results of that is people stay indoors more. They trust each other less. They trust even their own culture less. They trust other cultures less. I mean, these are actually studies that they've been done that are showing how the forced integration and making it happen so rapidly is hurting society as a whole. And it's creating a more unstable and imbalanced society rather than a balanced society. It needs to be more natural. And multiculturalism, I would say, is unnatural immigration, whereas immigration in general should just be very natural. Like you would say birds immigrate, or, you know, whales immigrate, or something like that. I mean, there should be a more natural way, but, you know, geese fly together when they immigrate.
Right. So,
and then they stay together.
I think what you're doing is you're looking at the end cause of it is an unnatural phenomenon, right?
Yes.
And you're looking at the end cause of the unnatural phenomenon, which is immigration, and saying immigration needs to stop. It's like saying cancer needs to stop in America.
Yeah.
But you should, I'm breaking up again. Okay, here I was at cancer needs to stop in America. Can you hear me right now?
Yes, I can.
All right. But you still need to eat McDonald's and drink Coca-Cola and all the things that are causing you to have cancer.
All the GMOs and the additives and the air and the stuff in the water. And
exactly. They're still going to be spraying us, putting fluoride in our water, whatever else. So you say you want to stop cancer in America. You shouldn't be talking about cancer in America. You should be talking about them spraying the skies with aluminum. You should be talking about them poisoning our water. You should be talking about the food you're eating. You should be talking about the high fructose corn syrup you're drinking. So when you're talking about an issue that's happening, which is mass immigration, is it's definitely a problem. It's a bigger problem for the people who are actually immigrating. They're the ones that have lost their homes. They're the ones who have gotten bombed. Yeah. So the problem isn't immigration, though. The problem is people getting bombed. The problem is people setting this up and on purposely shipping people away from their homes so that they can and forcing people into other cultures. The problem is not immigration. People, people don't want your culture as bad as you think they do. They're not as interested in America. Like what Americans think, you're not in America right now. So I think you know that by being someone who's at least traveled to Brussels, that when you go somewhere else, they're happy in Mexico with their tacos and their enchiladas, and they're happy with their culture. They're happy wearing their sombreros, and they're not interested in your, you know what I mean? As they may listen to Michael Jackson and, you know, whatever else, whatever pop star is relevant right now. And what the Russians, they may listen to some American music, but in reality, they're very happy being in Russia. They're not excited to mass immigrate to the United States. They like their own culture. And
yeah, well, the issue again is you're going to have the globalists and the people at the top of all these dominance hierarchies. You know, I mean, the people at the top. So what we want is a holarchy. What they want is a hierarchy. You know, they want the power hierarchies that are like this rather than the holarchies, which are a bunch of holons that kind of fit together in communities.
What do you call it? A holarchy?
Holarchy. Holarchy. It's based on holons. So a holarchy is a natural system. So let's look at atoms. You have molecules transcend, include atoms. Tissue or cells transcend and include molecules. Tissues transcend and include cells, all the way up to organs, and then to, you know, a body. So that is how holons work together. And those are like systems that are kind of like, have you ever seen the flower of life? A lot of New Age people wear the flower of life, but it's actually a very historical and ancient.
Right. You're talking earlier, the trivium, like,
yes.
So.
The trivium is based on, is different. That's the 7 liberal arts, the first 3 of the 7 liberal arts, which was developed by Aristotle based on his traveling to Egypt.
Isn't there a symbol of the trivium that is like a layered circles or something, layered triangles on the top of each other?
Yeah. It's there is.
That's okay.
But the flower of life is different. It's just a bunch of concentric circles that are like a lot of Vesica Pisces, all connected as one thing. You have the seed of, it goes, I think it's like the seed of life. It goes from 1 circle to 2 circles to a seed of life to the flower of life. And that's how kind of holons work together. And we want to develop a society that is a holarchic society. And we want to get out of the dominance hierarchy, which is pyramid based. And authoritarianism and collectivism is all pyramid based. And anarchy, when it's in its liberty forms and not its communistic forms, is going, when it's voluntary, you're going to have flower of life or holarchy. But you have to make a transition. You know, you have to leave behind the mindset that makes you go into dominance hierarchies in the first place. And we are a hybrid of both systems. So maybe our natural rights and stuff stem from the holarchic natural system, which is what natural systems are. And then you have this artificial system, which is a dominance hierarchy. But we were raised in both because we have our natural rights and our naturalness to us, but we also have our mindsets that are very much unnatural. And we have to purify and get rid of all those unnatural mindsets and patterns of relating. I mean, we might not even realize how we're doing it. Carl Jung called that doing shadow work, where we go through and we start looking at and reflecting on our patterns and saying, how am I like this? Like my wife and I, we went to a concentration camp, and we went through this experience and we asked ourselves, how is this me? How am I a concentration camp guard? How do I have this capacity for evil within me to act in this way, in a dominance way? And we worked through that. It took us several days of working through and experiencing that kind of inner shadow and that inner darkness so that we could shine light on it, so to speak.
All right. I lost you at inner shadow, sort of. You said inner shadow, sort of. You're breaking up for the past, like, about a minute there. Can you hear me right now? You're frozen on my screen.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
You're back now.
You there?
Yeah, I lost you there for a minute.
Okay, I see you back.
I'm out here in the bus with a Wi-Fi extender. I have an extension cord going out to the lawn so that I could get some Wi-Fi out here. Didn't want to wake everybody up at 6, so
okay.
got a little.
Let me see. I want to share something really quick let me share screen. There we go. Okay, so do you see this? And I recognize that Teddy Roosevelt did a power grab, but I still think this is an important quote that really highlights what has to happen within people to be able to remove this dominance hierarchy mindset and be able to move into the holarchic mindset. From this collectivist mindset, which is dominance hierarchy, to individualist mindset, which you cannot give self-government to anybody. He has got to earn it for himself. You can give him the chance to obtain self-government, but he himself, out of his own heart, must do the governing. He must govern himself. That is what it means. That is what self-government means. There must be control. There must be mastery somewhere. And if there is no self-control and no self-mastery, the control and the mastery will ultimately be imposed from without. So this is kind of the process. We have to regain, as a people, as individuals, we have to regain our self-mastery so that we can govern ourselves. And if we do not govern ourselves, we will be governed. And we have a lot of mindset still. A lot of our mindset is dualized. We're partially natural or partially unnatural. And a lot of people are more unnatural than they are natural. And we have to work through that within ourselves so that we can become more natural, so that we can actually be we can actually earn and obtain self-government again. So and I'm against opening the borders fully until we're all responsible enough to actually, until we're all responsible enough to live with the consequences and be responsible enough to own, our space and our property in the right way.
Yeah, I agree that people need to take control of their own self. That's for sure. And if they don't take control of themselves, I don't believe it's the right of anybody else to take control of that person. It's not the right to violate somebody's right just because they don't take control of themselves. But somebody will violently, because there's psychopaths out there, and that's why we have government, because psychopaths exist. Mm-hmm. So there will be people definitely who will take control of people who don't take control of themselves. And it's the reason why they've created the system that they have in line for. They don't want people to take control of themselves. So they train them from a very early age in their indoctrination camps to learn not to take control of themselves. And kids leave school understanding how to be subjects to government after their 18 years of life.
Indeed. Okay, so I think we can actually wrap this up, but I want to know, at least from my perspective, my viewpoint, I think this was a very productive conversation. We asked a lot of questions. We got a lot of nuance from the thing. I think you better understand my position. I better understand yours. How do you feel as a result of, what is your thoughts on our conversation?
I think it was a good conversation. I think we had a good back and forth going on here. I did want to show you something I have pulled up here. Let me do my screen share.
Okay, sure.
Just something for you to think about. Let's see. How desktop one, click on that. Is that the...
Well, if you want to share your desktop, you can share windows too, though. So you can select the window that you want to share. Like when you go to share screen.
Yeah. All right, I'm doing the desktop. You got my...
Okay.
And let's go get this thing out of my way. All right, so we've talked a bit about being sovereign, your rights as being sovereign. Yeah. And let's see. This one right here, let's see. Now, this is a United States law, so in reality, this means nothing. It's just some other man's opinion. It's not, in my mind, something that because it's a law that is written in some books has some special meaning. But it does also hold some truths in this law. So basically, the sovereignty developed on the people, and they are truly the sovereigns of the country, but they are sovereigns without subjects, and they have not governed themselves. Okay, this isn't the one I was talking about, but there's one that talks about how the rights of the people are sovereigns, the same rights of the former sovereign, the king, but without subjects. So basically, it talks about the rights of the king. And when you think about where would the king, who said he owns everything, have the right to travel and not travel? And then, but he had subjects. And then where do you, as someone who is the king without subjects, have the right to travel? I think that's a good thought of where your rights for traveling is. If you had, I mean, if you have the same rights the king had,
Right.
how far does that go?
Well, a king supposedly had rights over his kingdom because it was all his property, and then they were subjects to that. So he said, all of this is my property and my family's property. Therefore, you are subject because you are living on my property. That's what a king would say.
But the king's also not subject to somebody else's jurisdiction when he goes on to the property of another king. Right?
A king is a king able to go on?
If a king comes to the United States, if there's a king that comes to the United States and he decides to do 80 miles down the highway, will he get a speeding ticket? No, he gets diplomatic immunity from that, right? You have the right to do what you want where you want.
You said if he steps on the highway.
I said if he does 80 on the highway, does he get pulled over for that? Does he get a ticket? Of course not. He gets diplomatic immunity for that because he's a king. He does what he wants where he wants. And it's the same thing. You can go where you want, do what you want, where you want. You are a sovereign with no subjects. You can go travel anywhere. You have no one can tell you what to do.
Well, but in practice, even when America was a mostly anarchist kind of state or nation, they still, when they would go to other countries, if they would obviously be diplomats and stuff like that, but they didn't have the right just to go anywhere without, calling first and interacting in a voluntary manner with, that other nation, correct? They had to be invited.
Of course, no, because no man can grant you a right. Of course they had the right. There were those rights.
But they would get invited. So they would go over there and then.
Right, and there's people, so while they were a mostly anarchist society, they weren't met in masses as a group of people violating the rights of masses. That was still going on in other places. Yes, it's been going on for thousands of years. People's rights have been being violated. So yes, they still had to go over and give passports or not passports, but they still had to have permission to come and go to other countries.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they didn't have the right. It's just their rights were violated.
Well, they would have privileges on those.
I'm not sure how to get out of the share.
Those lands, but they were granted privilege to visit there. Okay, at the very top, there should be a red button. If you
stop share, there we go.
Okay, there we go.
We're back.
Okay. Again, it's rights versus privileges. It's like interacting with somebody on their private property. I mean, if the king, quote, supposedly owns his property and he has, quote, rights to it, we have privileges on his property.
Right. The king never owned anything, though. Right. He only owned what he could manage. The king was a mass violator of people's rights, and that's why the king doesn't exist anymore. So, the king was overthrown because he never owned anything.
We want to create
the king stole.
sovereign people and get over this whole top-down thing.
Right.
It's a unnatural dominance hierarchy where might makes right.
Right. So the idea, getting rid of the king owning all this land and having these borders has been replaced with a new king, right? And even all the presidents are related to the king.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just a new form of kingdom. And this is the new king's land. And if you go hunting on the king's land, you took the king's elk, and you know what I mean? You fish the king's fish, and you got to pay the king for it. It's still the kingdom hasn't changed, and the kingdom's still just as immoral as it was back then. And to call out the kingdom as immoral and call the king and saying that he doesn't own any land as immoral, it's just the same as it was back then. Today, it's you know what I mean? King Trump doesn't own anything, and the United States government doesn't own anything. So he never had the right to tell people they could come to England or not. But now that right has been transferred to a government king, and it was a right that never existed that got transferred. So you can't transfer rights that you don't have.
Mm-hmm.